Hello and welcome to Inside the Iconography, a new monthly podcast where Taylor and I will have a special guest or two where we will dive into the filmography of an iconic director. Today we are joined by the lovely Coyote, Adam Collin.
I get
You get a lovely.
I get lovely on this show. Thank you. Thank you.
And the always delightful Videodrew. How are you?
Hi. I'm doing great. How are you?
We are very good. And
it is bright and early and we're ready to go.
We are. This is going to be a lot of fun. And of course, Videodrew, I'm going to get you to say, who is your special guest for this month? Who is the filmmaker that you have picked?
Oh, wait, you're asking me? Oh,
yes.
Well, there's one person that me and Adam really bonded over early in our friendship and knowledge of each other, and that is the great David Lynch. Very clearly inspired a lot of my aesthetic and a lot of my worldview, and to find out Adam was a big fan as well, just kind of like feel like made us instant friends.
So, Adam, why David Lynch?
I echo everything Videodrew said, but in addition to that, my gateway drug was Blue Velvet. And the best part about it is I watched it in a freshman year rhetoric class. And the professor literally brought in one of those TVs on a cart with a VCR. And I watched it that way. But that felt kind of appropriate in a way. I ended up seeing it a year later on the big screen. So that was cool. But anyway, after that, it was just, I couldn't stop. And we'll get into that more soon.
All right. Videodrew, what is it about film in general? So just to the general, so about film that you fell in love with. What got you to fall in love with film? Was it Lynch or was it, is it just the medium in general?
I think it was around this period of time that Mulholland Drive came out, like around 2001. I got to see it in theaters. That I really just started to fall in love with film, like in a way that was different than like how I like music or books, which I love, and television, which I like have a very special place in my heart for. But like there was something really just cinematic about Lynch's world that made me realize like, oh, there was also, Wes Anderson around this time and a bunch of movies. 1999 was a huge year for like movies, and like there were just so many great pieces of like quote unquote cinema coming out around this period of time of like the very early aughts that I feel like made it feel very special to me to be hitting like the end of high school, going into college.
Yeah, that's I have that kind of same thing though for the late 2010. Like 2010, 2011 have like some really special movies for me. Same with 09. Adam, what made you fall in love with film?
Frankly, it was watching horror movies too young. That was a big part of it. And what frightened me, fascinated me the deepest. And that tradition carried on throughout my life. So when I went to film school and I discovered Lynch's work, it was just, I felt like he'd just been out there all my life. And, I just felt like the right time to discover his stuff. And the thing I loved about his films, going back to Blue Velvet, even watching it on that small television, it really transported me, not only with its aesthetic, but with its mood and its atmosphere. And every time I sought out a new film of his, I just knew it'd be something that, even if I only saw it once, I would never forget it. And that held every time I watched one of his films. And it just, they're just incredibly evocative for me when I watch them.
That does make sense, like especially with the horror background and having recently done all of his films, he does use horror elements throughout his filmography a lot that makes sense for why someone like you, or like why you gravitated so much towards him as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of he often deals with things that are very frightening, but aren't, what you would necessarily consider traditional horror. And I just, Eraserhead is often oversimplified as a horror film. It has horrific things in it. It's very nightmarish, but it transcends any one genre for me. But I do think he has a lot of horror imagery in his films and a lot of mood that I think Videodrew would agree.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way of putting it. I wouldn't even like. It's funny to hear you call like horror films. I'm like, yeah, they're horror films. I guess I've never considered them like horror because there's no vampires, there's no mummies, or like there's no like creatures like that. There's no ghosts per se. It's really just more about like the nightmarish ambiance of his movies. A lot of times they can, like Blue Velvet, not involve anything supernatural necessarily at all. It's just about sort of the dream-like nightmarish quality that situations get imbued with, especially situations that are very traumatic, which I think he tends to focus on. And I really appreciate that.
I guess that's why they maybe stand out for me more as horror, because when I think of horror just on a personal level, I don't necessarily think like supernatural or creatures or anything like that. For me, when I think horror, I think like existential crises. And like if I see that stuff in a movie, I'm like, that's some horror right there. You don't need to give me any supernatural anything. If you give me, think about the meaning of life and think about all these horrible real life things, but put them in a hyper, realistic, super just, yeah, I want to hear your thoughts, because this is the first time you'd watched any of them, and we watched them all in one hit except for one of them.
Yes, we did all of them in the last month.
I would like your initial thoughts.
Going in, I knew of his reputation. I knew that Lynch was very much that his movies were a lot deeper and you had to sit with them and think about them. So binging them probably wasn't the smartest way of watching these movies, but it was a rough slog for the first couple. And then I think, and I'm fascinated because at some point I am going to go back and redo this and rewatch a lot of his movies, because at some point I think it clicked. And I think what he's trying to do clicked. Now, either he personally got better as a filmmaker in making his films more accessible widely, but also still having his own style, or I just started to click with what he was actually doing because I'd been in his world for the last month. So, because the one that most people don't like, which is Lost Highway. Lost Highway is, I found, is one that a lot of people just really do not enjoy, and they think that it's one of his weaker movies. I loved Lost Highway. I thought Lost Highway was absolutely incredible, and I basically, from Lost Highway onwards, didn't have a bad movie, which I know is only two of them that we got to watch, but I really loved Mulholland Drive. Straight Story is, I think, if you never in a million years could have told me that was a David Lynch movie. If I never in a million years would have guessed. If you didn't tell me that that's who directed it, I would have been shocked. So that one's kind of it's good, but at that point I was kind of missing hey, cool, you can do it. I get it. You this was I can do the normal stuff. I can do a normal movie and you will like it and it will be popular. I mean, I know this one wasn't popular, but it will, garner all the awards, and it'll
be by Disney.
Yeah, it'll be by, and I can do it, but it's not what I want from a David Lynch movie. And it was just such whiplash going from Lost Highway to Straight Story was just the biggest whiplash ever. But I have really grown and found a love and appreciation of his movies, and that wasn't there when I had started because I was really not enjoying I was not enjoying these movies, and then towards the end I've really, really started to love them.
So did you watch these sequentially? You started with Eraserhead and you ended with Mulholland Drive. Yeah, I could see how that could be like a little bit of a slog to begin with. Like if you have no introduction to David Lynch, starting with Eraserhead is not like where I'd recommend anyone to start, because I would say like it's probably his least accessible film. It is his least accessible film, probably besides Dune, just in terms of like sheer what the hell's going on. Like I don't know any of these people, but I'm interested to hear your take on Fire Walk with Me, because I'm assuming this means you haven't seen Twin Peaks.
So I've never seen Twin Peaks at all. Neither of you.
No.
I knew roughly about Twin Peaks because pop culture over the last 30 years has been basically just a love letter to Twin Peaks. Like, there's a lot of, Simpsons from seasons 3 onwards, but basically just like we're doing a Twin Peaks references pretty much every 4 episodes. So, and I watched a lot of Simpsons. So I kind of knew enough about Twin Peaks that it wasn't confusing or completely out there because I kind of did know what was going on. I really enjoyed Fire Walk with Me. Like I actually like that was Walk Fire with. I really, really did enjoy that film. And
well, then good. We can be friends.
Yeah, no, I'm, and it's to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to watch the show now. Like, I really do need to watch the show now because it's one that I just wasn't expecting to love as much as I did, considering it is meant to be the wrap up movie of like.
Well, I think that's it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's of like we're going to explain what happened that the show wasn't able to because it got cancelled.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's funny because this is the order I watched them in too. I watched Fire Walk with Me before watching Blue Velvet. That's also broken. Sorry. Before watching Blue Velvet. Before watching Twin Peaks. Got a little distracted there. And I think that's the way to do it. I mean, I know it gives away who killed Laura Palmer sort of in the explanation, but I think what disappointed so many people after seeing Twin Peaks, this movie got like booed at Cannes, I think. Like this movie got like terrible reviews. It's only like in retrospect that people are coming around and like loving this movie, especially as it takes place in like a larger now Nexus universe that he's created with a little bit of an Inland Empire, but mostly with Twin Peaks: The Return. People really didn't like this movie because specifically it didn't resolve any of the questions that the show brought up. It just kind of showed you the events that took place before the film and focused really intensely on the familial trauma and terror of Laura Palmer's life. And like Laura Palmer had never, besides like the ghostly image of her, she'd never really been a character. She'd been like the sort of catalyst of the show. So to really focus on her and Leland, her father's relationship, and to focus on sort of like the terror and dread and love and the fear that was like all wrapped up in this little idyllic family, I think really pissed people off because they're like, no, we want to hear about like Agent Cooper. We want to find out what happened to like all these other characters that they don't really even address. And they start the movie by bringing in like 10 new people that you've never met before. Like we've never seen Chris Sutherland. We never see him again. Like we don't know like what happened to Chris Isaac. Like there and until like unless you watch the Return and you pay a lot of attention, like Adam is actually wearing a shirt, I believe. Is this the
Oh no, this is actually Schmodown related.
Oh, it's Schmodown related. I thought you were wearing the Philip Jeffries as a teapot.
My team partner there.
Yeah, which is a shirt that I think I sent you, right? Or no?
You sent me Got a Light.
Gotcha. I got sent you the Scary Hobo Got a Light. Yeah. There's the David Bowie character, which you see for like second. Just he has a really quick scene in Fire Walk with Me. You never see him again. You just know that there was another agent that was on a case before the main case of Laura Palmer, and then like in the third season, The Return, he comes back as a teapot because clearly David Bowie's no longer alive. So now he's like a sentient tea kettle. It's like a giant tea kettle thing, and like you just go with it, right? I mean, like it's just sort of like
it
you
makes
understand
sense when you watch it.
Yeah, you understand that Philip Jeffries, who's a character I don't think was mentioned ever in the show, and is just referenced in the Fire Walk with Me, and is then brought back in after the actor's death in the Return. I mean, it's all just kind of, you kind of have to go with the dreamlike logic of it all. But I think watching Fire Walk with Me is the way to get into Twin Peaks and not trying to watch it afterwards.
I've heard that a lot from people who are just getting into David Lynch and Twin Peaks specifically. I always like give people a disclaimer if they're asking my opinion. I say, well, it's going to refer to things that happen in the series, so you may not get all the references. I personally did watch seasons 1 and 2 of Twin Peaks before I saw the film. But I at this point am convinced there are advantages to doing it both ways. And I do think there's a pretty high success rate for people who watch Fire Walk with Me and like it, who are either casual with Lynch or maybe not super high on all of his work. It really seems to grab people. And I love it because it was his first opportunity to have no limits with that universe.
Mm-hmm.
And network television, restrained it, even though they did amazing things with the original series. The movie really showed what it could be. And then the return delivered on it years later. And I think that, frankly, is one of his, arguably his masterwork in a lot of ways.
That's
and if you get to the point where you've watched all of Twin Peaks, then you can watch The Return. Don't just jump into The Return.
No,
You do need to watch seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Even the parts of season 2 that really suck and he wasn't even involved.
There are some dumb parts of season 2, which I'm kinder to because that's just me. But I understand why they're frustrating for people. Twin Peaks is this like microcosm of Lynch that like I could talk about forever, and I think Videodrew would agree.
I mean, I taught a class on Lynch and specifically Twin Peaks in college, so like I definitely can talk about it forever. I think that I really like what you said. I do think that the one nice thing about watching the movie before you get into Twin Peaks is sort of a barometer test, just to see, will I like this world? Is that, like you said, Adam, like there might be some references you don't get because you haven't seen the show yet. I mean, there's also some references you won't get because they're just either something that's in The Return or just something unknowable. There's no way to differentiate between the dreamlike references of I'm trying to think of like the Garmin Bosia, which is not ever brought up in the show, versus like the dreamlike references of Annie, Heather Graham's character, showing up in bed dead next to Laura Palmer. Like there's no way to differentiate that dream imagery versus so there's no, I don't feel like people are gonna be like, oh, I don't get it, what was that supposed to mean, any more than like they would have had it not been contextualized in Twin Peaks, because it's all just sort of like random imagery.
Well, I mean, and I think that's the case, and I think that's why you and I enjoyed it. We both came out of Fire Walk with Me going, okay, I think I start to get what Lynch is about, what he's trying to do. Like you said, it's either clicking for us or it's clicking for him as a creator at that point. I think that it wasn't confusing. It wasn't confusing to me in any sense where I was watching it and I thought, oh man, I really feel like watching the TV show would have cleared up these things that are really putting me off this and I can't figure out what's happening. I never had a moment like that. Anything where I didn't think I fully understood something, or maybe there was more to it. It just made me want to watch the TV show more rather than just being like, oh, I don't know. I don't feel like I can get into this. I think he just does a great enough job keeping the world interesting in the movie in the way that I'm sure it is in the TV show, and having enough there to grab both of us into being like, well, damn it, now we need to make time to watch the TV show among all the other things we need to do, because it's an interesting world.
Yeah.
Well, it's why I don't recommend watching Eraserhead first, because Eraserhead is sort of like the one end of the spectrum of just pure ambiance. Like what Fire Walk with Me has a lot of is ambiance, which is just the dread, the feeling of terror. Like it's nice out, it's a beautiful day, the birds are shining. Like why do I feel like literally there's a man underneath my bed that's about to crawl out and grab me by the leg? Like, why do I feel so terrified? It's just the feeling of like an immersive panic attack or immersive like night terror that's just sort of gripping hold of you. But it has the contextualization of being like, this is a normal town. Like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong? Like, whereas Eraserhead just so exists in that dream-like other world. It would just be like watching an entire movie, which I could do, by the way, of like the things that happen in the Red Rooms, the events that happen in Red Room, which is just all nightmare dream logic. Like, you kind of almost need the real world, Lumberton, Twin Peaks sort of stability to like orient yourself in order to feel that terror and feel that nightmare.
And I think that's why Lynch, for me, works really well when he does LA, because LA has that. LA is very much a town of, we're selling everything being amazing and wonderful, and it's absolutely incredible, and your dreams will all come true. But there is a very deep and dark underbelly to LA. And I think that Lynch works really well in that world, because that's the type of movies he revels in. Of, on the surface, everything's happy, but underneath there's a real dark horror and a dark world that's underneath. And he loves going into that dark world. And I think that's why Blue Velvet, I think on a rewatch might work for me. I think the problem I had with Blue Velvet,
too normal? I
actually kind of think maybe it is that they don't. Every other movie that does this has the dreamlike, has the surrealist imagery, has the we're playing with film and storytelling and narrative narrative. Whereas in Blue Velvet is pretty much a straightforward narrative.
Yeah.
It just deals with a lot of dark and underbelly issues.
Yeah, it's just a straight up noir. I mean, I've kind of always felt this way about Blue Velvet. Not to say that Blue Velvet's overrated. I don't think it is. I think it's a great movie. But I think in terms of showing like what Lynch is, like I also wouldn't start unless somebody has like a very my ex-husband had very like linear narrative taste. Like he liked movies that just like told a story and like didn't like to get too confused by the narrative structure. And so Blue Velvet would be like a good intro point for him to watch a movie because like that is just a straight A to B. This is just like you can understand what's going on. There's an ear in the field. Yes, some of this stuff is surreal. Some of the stuff is creepy, but this stuff could all plausibly happen. And it doesn't take like any creative workaround in your mind to figure out like the logic of it. Like the logic is terrifying, but it is realistic. Where something even when you go a little bit later and you go to Wild at Heart, I mean, that starts to blend into like, okay, it's a road trip movie. But there's like all this weird stuff with her mom, and it's getting Wicked Witch of the West, and it's all becoming like Wizard of Oz, and how much of this is real, and where's the timeline on this? Like they're skipping around a little bit, and so I feel like that, and Lost Highway, of course, being so fractured of a narrative, that to me is like really where the Lynch stuff, like really, I think for me personally, is more interesting than just the straightforward stuff. Like it becomes like a straight story.
Yeah,
And me, like I kind of enjoy all of it blended together, to be honest with you. Like I love when he gets as surreal as possible, and I think Fire Walk with Me is a very interesting midpoint of his career because I think that was him again cutting loose in a lot of ways. So when he gets to Lost Highway, I feel like that was like modern Lynch proper, if you will, like that a lot of people are used to when they think of his work. I think Lost Highway was that big turning point. Straight Story, if you take another look at it, I think what's unique about Straight Story, but also connects it to his other work, is like movies like Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and to an extent Mulholland Drive, he's examining, these often unthought of moments in our lives. And I don't think many of us had considered the possibility of someone riding a lawnmower across state lines to visit an ailing relative as a workaround to a licensing issue. But that might seem really bizarre and mundane to a lot of people, but he seized upon that. And in my opinion, I think what's special about that movie is Richard Farnsworth is very endearing, but it's not this sentimental story about him figuring out the meaning of life. He talks to other, peculiar, unique people along the way and deals with things very matter-of-factly. And I think you see characters like that all throughout David Lynch's work, not least of all, I'm thinking of Jack Nance's character in Twin Peaks, Videodrew, who's not prominent in the film. He's in the deleted scenes, but Pete Martell in the series is very similar, in my opinion, to Richard Farnsworth's character in Straight Story.
I'd agree with that. I think that there's always this sort of like kind of sweetness too, that like Lynch isn't all dark, and in order for him to even show darkness, there needs to be something light. I think of like is it Richard Pryor who's in
Lost Highway?
Highway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I think that was his last role. I mean, he's just got a couple scenes. But it just kind of like lightens things a little bit. There are like characters like that. I think Sutherland plays a really good role in that respect too. In the beginning of Fire Walk with Me, I also think David Lynch himself, as the character of Gordon Cole, director of the FBI, plays that role in the series. Like he's just such a sweet guy too. Like he for some reason he's always shouting. He's like hard of hearing, but he's always like,
"How you doing, Coop?
How you doing, Coop?" Like it's just so funny. Like there's that little bit of levity that shows this sort of like almost like childlike innocence that goes along with the horror, that we kind of reminds us what the stakes are, what we're fighting for, like what's good in this world. It's a little bird at the end of Blue Velvet.
And people who work with Lynch often say that about him, that he has this innocence to him in a way.
Yeah.
kind of fascinating.
Mel Brooks called him Jimmy Stewart from Mars.
So, he really has two movies that aren't surrealist going into the darkness area, and one of them I think kind of does. So Straight Story is obviously his movie that he doesn't really go into any form of real darkness. Like he does talk about he does go into like war memories and stuff, which I thought was really great. I think that scene's fantastic in Straight Story. But the other one is obviously Elephant Man, and that's the one that really like put him on the map and got him Dune and got him as his first Oscar nomination. How do you guys feel about Elephant Man and where that lands in David Lynch's filmography?
Well, Elephant Man is interesting because that's the one that Mel Brooks like secretly produced. Like that's his connection to Mel Brooks. Is Mel Brooks saw Eraserhead and was like, "This is great. I want to produce like this movie from you, like about this very famous story." Been made. I think it had already been made into a stage play before, so people had like knew about. I forget his name. Is it Stephen?
John Merrick.
John Merrick. People knew about this story. I think giving it to Lynch was a brilliant idea, and I also think it's probably his most heartfelt film. I think Straight Story is very like Disney codified, but I don't think he felt that personal of a connection to it. Besides, the ambiance of like the big open fields and like the tractor and I feel like that, or the lawnmower. Sorry, I feel like that's where he felt it. Where Elephant Man, I feel like you really feel the heart of him kind of beating, and he's not. Yeah, the imagery is surreal. The noisescape, just kind of like Eraserhead, is like over the top. But you really do feel him. The two characters in this just really caring about each other. The doctor played by Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt playing Merrick. And it's just a beautiful story about like people who showed the inherent goodness in a world that is otherwise very ugly and very industrial and very cruel. And I find it like probably his most sentimental film.
I think it is definitely his most sentimental, and definitely the one that he is being very definitely trying to find the goodness in people. My one issue, I think I would have loved if they had delved a little bit more into when Frederick is like, am I turning him into another freak show, but for more proper society? And I think that's where the real argument of the film should have been. And I think, and that to me kind of stops it from being one of those really great ones, is because it doesn't really have it kind of, everything just kind of happens.
Yeah, he never really has to wrestle with that for more than a scene.
Yeah.
Realistically, which I don't know. I had a hard time with this film because I really got into Eraserhead. I really thought it was great, and I was very excited about what I had seen. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm really interested to see where we go from here. And then we went to this one next, and I was like, ugh, okay, like this movie's good. It's fine. But I don't know. It was a weird jump for me. And I don't really think I enjoyed this one as much as most people seem to. I don't know. Didn't really.
I think those are the two ends of the spectrum, though, right? That we were talking about a little bit. Like, if one end is Straight Story, I think this Elephant Man falls a lot more in line with Straight Story in terms of a cohesive narrative, straightforward, like A to B to Z, and like it's really kind of, I wouldn't say it's maudlin, but it does have a sort of like a sense of maudlinness. There's almost like a very theatrical drama sense of it. Like it's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy. And it does sort of miss that surrealist elements that exist on the other end of the spectrum of, well, you might have it visually and you have like the imagery of the elephants and the sounds of the city and Merrick himself and the monkey cages and all that horror show. You don't actually have the sense of like that weird nightmare dread of seeing the imagery that's uncontextualized or decontextualized and without any sort of sense of where it's going. I think I agree with you. If you want to make a drama that was sort of about the inherent issue of, am I just making a freak show for a large, for a high society, then we did need to have more than just like lip service by a very unlikable nurse character, like make that argument. Like, besides, like, the worst person in the movie, besides the guy who's like stealing him to go to the circus, probably should have been saying that argument like somewhere beyond like the 2/3 of the mark into the movie.
Hmm.
But I think ultimately it's a movie just about that. Maybe it just rings false because it doesn't feel like something David Lynch actually believes is like the inherent goodness of people. I'm not sure if that's something he personally believes in.
Well, like you said, it doesn't really match up with what we've already been talking about, where he explores, the darker side and the underbelly of LA, as you were saying. Like, we really get those moments where he shows us the beautiful sunshine, and then we end up in this place where it's so surrealist and so just beyond what we can try to comprehend what's actually happening a lot of the time. And then you have a movie like The Elephant Man, where I don't feel like we get really any of that other than those couple scenes we just mentioned where they do lip service, but we don't actually explore any of that. So this is a strange one for me. I don't think it's a bad movie. I just don't think it's my favorite out of his, and I don't think I connect with it as much just because it just does feel so linear, and it feels so accessible in a way that Straight Story feels like, just on a different level. Straight Story, as we said, is more of like a Disney accessible. This is an Academy kind of accessible.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was
That's
a weird
exactly what I was going to say.
I understand where you're all coming from on The Elephant Man. I do. I really do. My connection with this film is a bit layered. And when I rewatched it recently, I liked it more than I did in the past. And I think a lot of that had to do with, again, the details he chooses to linger on are what fascinate me in his films, even the ones like this that are more straightforward. Gaslighting in that film and the sound of it is such a constant thing he maintains with the sound design all throughout the film. And for me, like, that really put me back in the time period. And it harkens back in a lot of ways to monster movies, which I think is what's unique about Elephant Man specifically. When I watch that film, it makes me think of Todd Browning's Freaks. The themes are very similar, but so is the imagery. A lot of the carnival scenes are very similar. But also, like one of the original versions of Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Laughton in it is very similar to The Elephant Man. Even if you just think of the Disney version, you can get an idea of how the themes would overlap. But that original Charles Laughton film is very dark and very scary and sad. And I find Elephant Man to have all of those qualities. And it is sentimental. And I don't think Frederick Treves is off the hook in that film. I think he's indicted, even if it's, somewhat, quietly. I don't think he's let off the hook. I think he's complicit. And I think that the dip into the nightmare are those people showing up at night in his room. I find terrifying, upsetting, and really painful to watch.
Oh, it's such a hard scene to watch. That is an actual nightmare scene to watch. Much like the Blue Velvet song scene in the candy colored clown scene in Blue Velvet is terrifying and hard to watch and sad, and like in the same way the car scene in Blue Velvet is hard to watch because it's just so intense. Like that scene of them coming into his room and like the guy who's been selling tickets and the women who are drunk and even little baby Dexter Fletcher there as the little boy is just, it's just such upsetting imagery. Like it's the kind of stuff that truly disturbs you, that if it had not been made by David Lynch, we would have called these scenes Lynchian.
Yeah, that I can definitely.
And I think Richard Attenborough's Elephant Man would be a much more straightforward film than this, even. Yeah. And I think it would be more maudlin and more sentimental.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think Lynch's perspective on it, I think Mel Brooks's instincts were on point. It was to bring something different to the perspective of this story, because otherwise it's just traditional Oscar bait. When you look at that film, the way it's put together, it really stands apart from a lot of films that have similar stories, in my opinion. And I agree it's more straightforward and it's definitely sentimental, but I think the way it's assembled is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so let's move on to arguably his most infamous film. The one that before Twin Peaks, if people had said David Lynch, this is the one that they probably would have mentioned, and that is obviously 1984's Dune.
Oh, okay. I was like, which one are we going to? Okay.
Yeah, where are we going with this? I was like, what?
So this was obviously my first time watching Dune. Was not a fan. I'll just say, like, I wasn't the biggest.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of this one.
Why didn't it work for you?
I think I'm fascinated to know how I'm going to feel about Villeneuve's version, if whether or not, and I think that's going to impact how I feel about this movie. Is it a problem I have with the source material, or is it a problem I have with the directing, or with the film in general?
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by that because I don't think the movie does a very good job of selling the world. I think it felt very much like this is this world, and you will just and
it doesn't need to introduce the world to you. Is that what you're?
Yeah, it just kind of goes. This is the world. Deal with it and just follow the story. And because we don't have time because we've got a massive novel to do all in one hit, and we've just got to go fast. And for that, I think it kind of came across as silly in a way that it didn't want to. I think I don't know. As someone who does really enjoy this, or not really enjoy, but like appreciates this movie, Adam, where do you come from?
Yeah, so I will be honest. Dune is my least favorite David Lynch movie, but I still like things about it.
Yeah.
There's the production design is really impressive, especially with the budget. That you can do a supercut of some of the imagery in this film, and it would be breathtaking.
And it would be specifically his Revenge of the Jedi, which was the movie that he was offered. This was what he took because he decided not to take Return of the Jedi. That it was offered to him. Like he decided to go do this instead. And there's actually, you can read, there's like he has I think I've found like a page or two of like a spec script he wrote for it was then called Revenge of the Jedi, and it was like it was very much like the scene in Dune with the guy's head in the jar, like the little brain in the jar. So it just was that. I mean, so it would have been a very different looking Star Wars movie. This was his trying to do Star Wars and then getting really interrupted by the studio, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's very you feel the struggle on screen because he shot a film and then he had to retrofit it with internal monologue for half the characters to explain the plot, and that is really awkward, and it's just not a good look. And the film is super clunky, and there's no real flow to it in terms of the way it's edited or anything. So I hang on to the things I like, but the reason I struggle with Dune is they had to shrink the script, and then after they test screened it, they had to recut it with all this ADR voiceover that was just, it comes off as slightly ridiculous because all the characters are explaining things to themselves internally as it's happening.
I agree with you. I just saw this movie for the very first time this year, and I was like, is this like a thing? Can they read each other's minds? Like, is this like part of the... I was like, is this...
They're just talking to themselves.
They're just talking to themselves. But then, like, one of them, I think, is a little bit like... Isn't Paul Atreides a little bit like psychic or something?
He can do a little bit of everything. But, yeah.
It's your favorite element ever when they go into movies and just put voiceovers and ADR.
It's still Blade Runner.
No, having just seen Reminiscence, because Reminiscence does this, and it was so frustrating.
He loves the movie, but that part...
It's just like, you don't need it. You do not need... Just let the visuals tell the story. Anyway. But I do agree with you, Adam, where you say this feels very studio influenced. And... we are, and a man's vision not lining up with where the studio wanted, and then them coming in and just being like, we need to fix this before it's released, and then ultimately a bad product is released.
It honestly, like, not everything has to come back to comic book movies, but it did feel similar to David Ayer's Suicide Squad. Like, when that came out, that movie feels at war with itself, and so does Dune.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I was going to say Blade Runner was the analogy that came to mind for me. Although most people do ended up liking the one with the voiceover of Blade Runner, but it does kind of have that feeling of like, how many cuts are there of Dune? Like, how many cuts didn't we see? Like, and also like it's sort of like failed, but it was massive in scope. But like Adam said, it didn't have the biggest budget, and so it kind of fit. Well, it was a creative, like I think, masterpiece on some levels. It also was like a failure of the technology at the time to live up to the to the ideas that were in his head. So like the scenes where they're fighting and they're like giant boxes, like it's just so silly looking. And you're like, what is this? Like I watched the trailer for the new Dune movie and I was like, is this what the movie's about? Like I had no idea. Is this
have you seen the side by side of the new trailer with they take
images?
There's a great side by side, and because Villeneuve, from my understanding, is to some degree a fan of Lynch's film, and there are certain shots that it's Villeneuve's aesthetic for sure, but the framing is almost exactly like it is in the Lynch film. So I'm excited to see what he gleans in terms of influence.
And I could have told you that even without having read it, like, or without you telling me that, is like Villeneuve is very clearly influenced by someone like David Lynch. When you watch a movie like Enemy, and you're like, what the hell is this movie even about? It's just about dread. It's about fear. It's about doppelgangers. Like, what is it about except like everything that David Lynch loves to talk about? Like, it's his, or not talk about, like, it is just about the feeling that you get inside and permeating that feeling and showing it in sort of a visual format. It's using film to like show a feeling. And I think Villeneuve has done that very well. So I think it's interesting that he tackled Dune. I think he's probably way more suited for it than someone like David Lynch, who was so structured in the ambiance, but not at all structured in the storytelling narrative, like A to B to Z stuff, like in that sci-fi concept. Whereas Villeneuve has done Arrival, he's done Blade Runner 2049. Like he understands that this is inherently two movies. You can't just do it as one movie. It's too big. Like the world is too big. If it's going to be something, it's going to be two-parter, so you have enough time to breathe and set it up before. Because I think the other thing with Dune is it feels like it's like 8 different films, and you're like, what's happening here? Like by the time we meet everybody, it's like 8 things are going on.
And they have to repeat and they have to repeat characters' names constantly.
Well,
and they have to define terms constantly.
Yeah,
the exposition never stops. In that way, it's a lot like the John Carter.
Yeah, I do think that's kind of cool. I know people hated the poster for the new Dune because it was like Paul, this guy, and everyone was like, why do we care that like Timothy Chalamet's name is Paul? Well, you will care because there's 100 different names in this, and like they have the visual reference to be like,
you need to know who the hell these people are. Trust me.
But that's what I also think.
Want to remember their names.
But that's also why I think, and like with especially this movie, because at the time a lot of these actors, they're well known, so I think it's a smart for a movie.
Great cast.
I think it's very smart for a movie when you've got a lot of character names and you've got and people are constantly mentioning all these characters. It's very smart to be like, we've got big names to play these characters, because that way you can actually associate some way of potential of that's who this person is.
I was a really good. I always thought a really good 5-pointer in Schmodown would be like, which 90s sci-fi TV star plays his doctor in Dune. I forget the doctor's name, because it's like hard because we have both Patrick Stewart, who plays his like best friend mentor, but then we also have Dean Stockwell from Quantum Leap playing the doc, like the traitorous doctor dude.
And Max von Sydow is a doctor.
What?
Max von Sydow is a doctor as well.
Max von Sydow is also a doctor, but not in any 90s television show that I'm aware of.
So you were saying that this is your least favorite Dune movie. What's Videodrew? Would this also be yours? Would Dune also
my least
be
favorite Dune?
Sorry, Lynch movie. Sorry, Lynch movie. Yeah.
Least favorite Dune movie. Go.
I'm just gonna say it's probably my least favorite Dune movie, just ahead of the previews. It's kind of one of his most unwatchable, but then again, I'm somebody who has like "In Heaven Everything Is Fine" tattooed on like my shoulder blades. Like I find Eraserhead to be pretty unwatchable. I think there are moments of Eraserhead that like become like pure art, but it is like watching someone's installation project like projected on a wall. Like I consider it like more like an installation piece than I do like a piece of narrative cinema. And so I feel like in terms of like how much do I want to rewatch Dune, like not super bad, but like do I not, hey, give it up, girl, drop it. But sorry, talking to my doggy, drop it. Bad girl, put it down. Do I want sorry, do I do I want to rewatch it? Not necessarily. Do I hate it and think it's like one of his worst films? Like, I don't think so. I think it's ambitious. I just don't think it's like up to where I want it to be. I would say that like I don't want to watch the straight story more than I don't want to watch Dune again, because at least Dune has visual elements that are appealing, and at least Dune has like a just some campiness even to it that feels like there's some subtext to grab a hold of, and then there's like the performances, and then there's like the world. There's like enough there for me to like chew into.
So
that floating baron is creepy. I will say that.
Yeah, Sting is great. Baron's creepy.
What is your favorite? Where do you guys land on what's the one, if you can put on any Lynch movie right now, what one would it be?
It's toss it. That's hard for me. I would say either it's Fire Walk with Me or Mulholland Drive. I mean, Fire Walk with Me, I think, is the movie that like made me just realize like how deep this thing went. And again, why watch Fire Walk with Me before Twin Peaks? But like Fire Walk with Me was what sold me like hook, line, and sinker that like Lynch wasn't just like, Wes Anderson or a bunch of other directors who I found around that time who were doing kooky stuff, or the guy who did City of Lost Children, I forget his name, who did Amelie that around that time. Like I really liked his work too. But like this is what like I think Fire Walk with Me is what set it apart from even those beautiful, creepy ambiance, Guillermo del Toro, even like kind of movies, and just like set it on a path of like, no, this is for me. This is for me. This was like written for people like me to understand and to dissect. But Mulholland Drive was like also a brilliant, beautiful film. I mean, it's also funny because Mulholland Drive started as a TV show idea, and it started as a spin-off about Audrey, like Audrey going to LA, the character of Audrey from Twin Peaks. So like they're both kind of born of Twin Peaks genesis, which probably just is why Twin Peaks is like the nexus event of my life. But I would say I think Fire Walk with Me, just in terms of like, it's so weird, it's so dark, it's so creepy, the performances are so good. Like you can't watch that movie and not just be like both terrified and like laughing. It's kind of like, watching Midsommar. If you're like a certain kind of person, you're like, oh wait, some of this is supposed to be funny, but they're not going to tell you when like the mood switches. Like you're going to have to just figure it out for yourself.
Madam?
So I'd say that one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to argue with that. It depends on the day. I think Mulholland Drive is, in a lot of ways, a great distillation of everything I love about his movies, which is why it's such a fun one to revisit. I also think it's one that seizes on horror in really interesting ways, not least of all the diner and the Winkies and Bonnie Aaron showing up as the homeless vagrant. It's terrifying stuff.
The nun. That's the nun.
Yeah, that's the nun there. But I know we've talked about how it's traditional, but I personally go back to Blue Velvet a lot. And the reason it's special to me is not only was my entry point to Lynch, but I think when you go and watch it, yes, it is a noir and it is linear. But what's cool about it is there are so many things he lingers on in it that make you second guess if you're watching something that's really happening. Just the way dead bodies will stand up straight.
Oh yeah.
Or, someone will stay, in one place too long, or the camera will linger on a corner of the room for a little too long.
And the dialogue is great. Isabella's fantastic in that. I know there's been a lot of criticism or critique or debate over like her performance in that, but that was one of the most compelling like performances I'd ever seen in a movie up until that point. Like that and Cheryl Lee in Fire Walk with Me, I think, are the two best written characters in the Lynch universe and best performed characters in the Lynch universe. And I think there's like, it's not an accident they're both women like characters, like, and they're both sort of like framed originally, I think, as victims, but it's sort of revealed that they have their own agency and their own autonomy, even within this being very traumatizing situation, which I think David Lynch is like a pretty big feminist, personally, but that's my read on his work.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably, can we get into that because we haven't actually talked about Mulholland Drive, which personally is my favorite. I think that's the one that I loved Mulholland Drive. I thought it worked really really well for me, and I think had both elements of what makes Lynch such a compelling director, and that movie does very much focus on female relationships and the female friendship between these two women that ultimately becomes a sexual relationship, and dealing with grief and the loss of a relationship, and how to move on from like how to or not move on, like, but in that twisted Lynchian way of not being able to move on from the end of something that meant more to you than to the other person, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that he dives into with this movie, and I think it's the performances by both Naomi Watts and I've forgotten her name, and
not
Laura
Rebecca Del Rio. It's
Laura
yeah.
Laura Harring.
Yeah, Laura Lena Harring.
Absolutely incredible, and I think why I think I love this one is the surrealism that you get from Lost Highway ends up paying off and making a little bit more sense. If that makes it, I you very much disagree with me on that one, and that's fair. That is fair.
No.
But it helps you understand.
Give me Lost Highway or give me nothing. The end.
Would it help anybody understand Lost Highway when I tell you that he told David Foster Wallace in one of the few big profiles that was ever written about him that this was about ostensibly the O.J. Simpson case?
Yeah, that I knew. That one I did know. Yeah, that it is about. It's
about like how a man can be both innocent and guilty, how he can be the same person but also be two different people at the same time, which I agree. He plays a lot around with, I think, in a much more fluid and much more understandable on like a base level way in Mulholland Drive. Even if you walk away going, what happened in Mulholland Drive? I don't get it. And like realize that the whole thing was supposed to be a pilot and the last 15 minutes were sort of tacked on. So like the idea of it being a dream and the revelation about like their actual relationship to each other, that was like a side note. That was just what he ended up making for what was supposed to be just the US release in case this pilot didn't get picked up and became Mulholland Drive. Sort of like if you watch the first episode of Twin Peaks, if you watch the European pilot, there is an ending on it, like a definitive ending after on the first episode where you find out who killed Laura, and it's like totally different than the movie, it's different than like the world lore that we have at this point. But it was like, yeah, there's this guy and it's something else, because they just needed to create like an ending that felt realistic in case the show didn't get picked up and they would need to release this as like a movie or a TV movie. So I think Mulholland Drive works incredibly well for what it is. I think it's probably the ultimate pinnacle we have of him melding together his surrealism first, narrative second kind of ideology, where the narrative does make sense, it does work, but like it wasn't the intent of making this to have that logic sort of play out.
And I do think it being a TV show first before a movie does probably help, like, lean into where you come from, where it's just it doesn't quite work.
I don't think it necessarily doesn't work. Like, I don't have any problems with that. I just would prefer to watch Lost Highway. I'm gonna put on Lost Highway before I put on Mulholland Drive. I'm going to put on Lost Highway. Like, I think it's hard.
It's hard to resist Bill Pullman playing a saxophone.
I mean, there's that. There's definitely
that Robert Blake scene. And I didn't realize this when I got my Robert Blake shirt, that the very creepy guy at the party in Lost Highway, who then went on to this is a very sad story, who went on to murder his wife in very like suspicious circumstances. She was found drowned in like the pool behind their house. He was the original guy from the Little Rascals, and he's the guy in the party who's like I'm at your home right now, and he's doing that creepy, he has like creepy white face, like kabuki style. It's the creepiest thing. in
with the
whole
weird
movie.
shaved part in his hair.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
god, that whole scene is so terrifying. Just in an atmospheric sense, I feel like you don't even need necessarily even the rest of that movie to understand the true horror that is David Lynch movies by just watching that one scene of that, of like a creepy man at a party coming up to you and being like, "I'm at your home right now. Like, call me." Oh,
It's
Yeah.
I really love that scene in Lost Highway. Like, and you're right. Yeah, Robert Blake's story. It's fascinating that this is his last movie to date because it so perfectly aligns to where his story went. But and what I really love about that movie is it doesn't try and give you a "this is why it's happening" explanation. It's it's just you go for it, and you if you don't like it, too bad. And I think
I'd argue that's all of Lynch movies, though. Like, none of Lynch movies try to set up why, and I always love that about them. Like, they never were like, "This is why these people did this, and this is why they summoned an occult god, and this is why." They never try to do a backstory. This is why Jigsaw is doing this saw trap. Like, it just is what it is. The world exists because it is, like they say in Wild at Heart, the whole world is wild at heart and weird on top. Like, that's just how the world is.
Lynch, in a lot of ways, without ever having to directly say it, he's the director who made it okay for directors now when they're pushed into a corner and say, explain your film. You know, like what was behind this? What was behind that? The film's my statement.
Yeah. Very famous interview with David Lynch where they're like, "You said Mulholland, what was it? You said Eraserhead is about dreams. Do you care to explain? Do you care to explain that?" And he just goes, "No." Like, it just says no. Like, it's for him. Like, he very much is an artist with a capital A. He does fine art. He does illustrations. He does mixed media. Like, he is an artist, and I think as an artist, he feels like his work he has a very artistic sensibility, which is a fine art sensibility specifically. Like, he went to school for fine art, and I feel like when you come from that world, as opposed from like the commercialism of Hollywood and stuff, you really do get offended with the idea that you have to explain the art any further than the art is just existing. Like, no one asks Mozart to explain what this piece is about. No one asks I feel like he's like that equivalent. No one asks him. No one should ask him beyond just, what is the mood? What is the thing? Not, what does this mean? And give me an answer.
Well, and that's something I really do appreciate about all of his films and about his, online presence or non-online presence is with so many
weather reports
with so many movies that exist now. And so it's such an interview culture. It's such a, get the director to explain this culture. It's such, you go on YouTube and there's ending explained, movie figured out. It's just all this stuff that with these movies, I don't want to hear Lynch tell me what any of this is about. I want the movie to tell me what it's about and what I think it means it's about. And the way he makes film, you can do that. And not everyone's going to come away with exactly the same answer, and that's great. But just thinking about how a lot of popular movies now, if there's no clear answers to things, people online get so angry. They get so angry that there's just no answer.
I think that's what's beautiful about David Lynch. Before I say that, I do want to say, are you not interested in hearing him talk about explaining his movies? Are you interested in him doing daily weather reports?
Yes.
And picking his favorite number out of a jar of numbers.
That's the content I want for my directors. Anytime anyone asks them.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what's David Lynch, I think, is art. Like, his book is The Art Life. Like, he lives his existence as art, as a living, breathing testament of the artistic statement. So when he does daily weather reports, when he's doing his weird YouTube videos where he's just picking numbers out of a thing, and today's lucky number is, and he's just doing these weird little shorts, he's just expressing himself through art and without any sort of need to contextualize it in the larger world. And I think that is more than anything else, more than anything, any single piece of art, any one thing has inspired how I like to live my life and how I choose to represent myself in the world, in the larger world. It's with no apologies, with no explanation needed. It is what it is. It's not going to be for everybody. It just isn't. And nor do I think it should be, nor do I think I feel like real art, like not as a capital like A, not saying anything against comic book movies because I think they're great and some of them do like, ascend to like artistic statements, but like there's a difference, right? And like we don't need and we shouldn't demand an explanation from art with a capital A like this, but it won't be for everybody. It's going to get a lot less money. It's going to get a lot less like millions and billions of page views, but it will be for the people who it inspires and for the people who are drawn towards it. It will be formative and it will be this thing that helps shape their identity.
And I think that is what gets into so fascinating about David Lynch is I came into this series wanting to figure out what is it about David Lynch and why his films have resonated so much with film culture, and why do someone who has never watched a single David Lynch movie, why do I know the name David Lynch? Why does my sister or parents know the name David Lynch despite having probably never seen any of his movies? And yet none of his movies have ever done particularly well at the box office. He's not had that big mainstay pop culture hit. And yet we all know who he is. And he is someone who is able to get a show like Twin Peaks: The Return massively coming back and be obviously in terms of film. Now, outside of in TV, he's had the massive pop culture hit. But even that wasn't a gigantic one because it only lasted 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think like Twin Peaks is, I think, probably what Lynch will be most remembered for, honestly. And it is interesting because that is probably the most compromised of an artistic statement, besides maybe Dune, that he'll ever make, at least originally, because he walked off the project season 2. He went to go make Wild at Heart. He like washed his hands of it, only came back to direct the finale. So as an artistic statement, it was, I mean, TV is just different too. It's just not one person's vision. It was always a collaboration between him and Mark Frost. And it always was like under network scrutiny. I think when he came back with The Return, his conditions for making it were this like huge deal. They almost dropped making it a couple times because he was like, "Oh, I need full ownership. I need to have final cut. I'm the only director." Right?
He's the only one who directed them.
He wrote most of them. I think Mark Frost maybe wrote a couple, but it was like his. It was more like a movie than it was like television because it was like his.
It's like a 15-hour film. Yeah,
it's a 15-hour film. Really, The Return is unlike anything you'll ever see on TV. And like people say, Twin Peaks changed television. Like, well, The Return like just changed it into something else right again. Like, it has such a nuclear blast of an impact in terms of formative experiences for the next generation of showrunners and writers for television. The reason it's in so many Simpsons episodes is because it's so many Simpsons. I mean, so many writers in television and so many directors were inspired by Twin Peaks to make shows like Wayward Pines, Bait Motel. Like most of the shows you love were in part inspired by the Twin Peaks model, with the quirky, episodic, but like fitting to this larger town. Like, this weird cast of characters, this A plot, this B plot, the C plot, the D plot. Like it all just fit into this thing that they helped create. So I think it's something that he probably isn't. Besides The Return, I don't think he thinks of Twin Peaks as like the one thing he's created because it was a joint collaboration, but I do think it is his like crowning achievement.
Oh yeah, and I feel like its influence is you can't calculate it. I think X-Files was the first big thing to capitalize on the popularity of Twin Peaks.
And maybe a little Lost without it, yeah.
Yeah, Lost definitely. But I think the resonance stays because it seizes upon the mystery of a small town, and that's what I think Lynch, when you look at all of his films, small town life and what's underneath the surface is what tends to be a resonant theme.
Los Angeles is a small town. People forget that about it, but it is.
Yeah, everyone knows each other if you live there long enough.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think that's exactly right, Adam. I think he plays a lot around with certain imagery too that we haven't really discussed, but like the strobe lights, the mirrors, the doppelgangers, the versions of oneself, like the sort of, there's a good you and then there's like an evil version of you. Like there's literally doppelgangers, but there's that surface layer of like the sunny LA, everything's bright and cheerful, and then there's like what's hiding behind the dumpster at the restaurant, you know? And it's like these two things seem incompatible, and then you realize no, they're one and the same. It's why you feel uneasy during a bright sunny day. It's why, you know, like it's why sometimes nighttime is your time. It's like it is just sort of I don't know if it's the truth of every single person's lifestyle or life that I can only speak to my own, but like it is the truth of my life that I feel like there's something about the world that feels like has that sort of surreal element where not everything is just quite where it appears on the surface layer. And I think he touches at that in a way that not many filmmakers do, because it's a hard thing to express. Like, think about how you have to create a whole language for it that doesn't involve words.
And I think it makes people uncomfortable, and I think that's why a lot of Lynch movies aren't as acceptable aren't as approachable, because they make people uncomfortable, and they make people question the world and what is society, and you know, what are you going through right now? Are you really safe? Are you really, like, what is in this underbelly that you don't know about?
It's not your typical comfort movie for a general audience that you're just going to throw on. But I think that's why they're so interesting.
Mm.
I also think there is like a sort of comfort to be taken to know that you're not, like you said, you're not safe is a great way of putting it. I think that's the feeling that he taps into really well, is that you're not safe, but like you have no reason to feel that way. It's that adrenaline fight or flight reflex that you're getting at the party where everything seems normal. It's that feeling of like dread when you're just watching what seems to be like a very normal performance of like a woman just singing on a stage. Like it is just that feeling of like, you're not safe here. Something's wrong. And that feeling that like he's showing you, not normalizing it by being like, but this is a inherent to the human condition feeling.
There is an iconic quote from the Twin Peaks series that embodies all of Lynch's work. And the quote is, "The owls are not what they seem." And that is really just a really good way of looking at everything, because even when you think he's just being surreal and weird, it's not what you think. And when you guys eventually get to Twin Peaks: The Return, we need to do a whole separate episode on just that, because it's like watching all of his filmography at once times 2 at least.
I'm looking forward to it.
We haven't talked about this film at all. I'm not sure. Did you guys see Wild at Heart?
No, we
did.
didn't get to see it. No, sorry, we haven't actually talked about Wild at Heart. Actually,
yeah,
no,
let's
because I'm not the biggest fan of it.
There's stuff for and against it, but I do think like having Lynch's words come out of Nicolas Cage and Willem Dafoe's mouths is like an experience that like needs to. It feels very natural. Like Nicolas Cage in a David Lynch movie feels like, I think, like the most naturalistic version of Cage that you can get, maybe outside of like a Charlie Kaufman movie. Like you just believe it. Like, oh yeah, this guy exists here and he's saying these random things, and like the words that come out in a David Lynch movie, you know, I hear people compare it to like M. Night Shyamalan writes terrible David Lynch dialogue, which is to say he writes dialogue that sounds very stilted and very formal in a certain way, and it sounds very like it's coming out of left field. Like characters talk to each other like they do in dreams. Like they just say their mission statements a lot of time. Like, you know, they just go, this jacket is a representation of like, oh God, I forget the quote.
This snakeskin jacket is a representation of my individuality.
There we go. So like no one talks like that in real life.
Of personal freedom.
Yes. There we go. Oh my God. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt. It's so good. It's so good, man. And like, it is just Lynch dialogue coming out of Nicolas Cage's mouth is like, wow, chef's kiss. Do I think it's like the best movie? No, but it's also the one you have to remember with some of the best performance. Diane Ladd's performance as Laura Dern's mother in real life, who is Laura Dern's mother, is so scary. The vomit, you know, when she's in the bathroom and her face is all smeared. It is some of the most
horrific.
Lipstick. Yeah, it does for mothers what I think Fire Walk with Me does for fathers.
Oh, Diane Ladd is so mommy dearest in this movie.
Oh my God. And it's so monstrous, right? It really does take the concept of mommy and daddy and like monstratizes it. I mean, Blue Velvet hits on it when it's like, you know, daddy wants to F word, you know, like it's this idea of taking the most pure thing that you can imagine, which is like parents and child relationship, and turning it into something that is not safe.
And Diane Ladd, Oscar nominated for Wild at Heart, which makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I understand why this is off-putting, Jacob. I do. I love Wild at Heart because it lives up to the title, and it is just David Lynch throwing a Molotov cocktail at the camera and just like having the time of his life. There is so much craziness. Halfway through the film, he decided he just wanted to start incorporating Wizard of Oz imagery. Cool. Yeah. Like, I have no problem with that. Like, the soundtrack. Glover. Yeah, Crispin Glover. Like, the thing is, Crispin Glover and David Lynch combined has to be isolated to one scene. And you saw what that one scene was. and Del, the cousin, is just one of my, like, favorite random Lynch characters. Yeah, like, I'm making my lunch! Like, he's so... I know. Like, if you watch the special features on Wild at Heart, hearing Nicolas Cage talk about Crispin Glover...
wow.
It's good stuff. I don't want to spoil it, but just look it up. You can find it on YouTube, I think.
Like, when I start nerding out, this is my version of, like, watching, like, the Snyder cut or whatever. I'm just like, wow, that sounds great. Nicolas Cage talking about Crispin Glover.
That would be... So that's the Videodrew. We talked about the Twin Peaks, the entire mystery Blu-ray set, where it's the original 2 seasons and Fire Walk with Me, and the 90 minutes deleted from Fire Walk with Me.
No, but someone did send me on Instagram recently the 90 minutes deleted. They've sent me a cut of Fire Walk with Me with those 90 minutes inserted back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to watch it. That reminds me to watch it. I haven't seen it yet. But that sounds amazing. I haven't seen the extra scenes yet.
Oh, it's really good stuff. All the actors from the show who are like scenes deleted that we saw that on IMDb for years. It's all their stuff. And
cannot wait.
It's great. Sorry, guys. This is what happens when you get us talking about.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
and I also know that like Inland Empire is very hard to find. I don't know what they did with that distribution
Inland
deal,
Empire.
or if it's like him, if like he just like didn't want it to be released after it was released, or like what happened.
I think the buck stops with David Lynch on Inland Empire. To be honest with you, I think like that was as indie a release as it could have been, and people just sought it out because it was David Lynch's new movie. But I don't think it's like attached to any one studio.
He did it without a studio. Oh,
I think it was a co-production, but I don't. It's not like what was it? 20th Century Fox has Mulholland Drive, right? Is it them or Universal?
I think it's Universal. Universal.
Oh, it's Universal.
Okay,
yeah.
I knew it was one of the
Universal Horror Nights.
I knew it was one of the two. Oh, that would be amazing. Can you even imagine? Can you even imagine like going into the theater where Rebecca Del Rio's singing?
Well, I think it's hard because Warner Brothers has The Nun, but then you could have the scary lady behind Winkies.
If you sent me into Winkies and told me I had to go behind the diner, I'd be like, get the hell out of here. No.
I almost wish it was Warner Brothers, so that way we could have had them in Space Jam: New Legacy. Like, that would have been great.
Now I'm sad. That movie upset me deeply.
I know. I mean, but it would have been if they pulled from Kenneth Anger, or Kenneth Russell rather. They would have had a way to find Mulholland Drive into that crowd scene in Space Jam: New Legacy. It would have been incredible.
They would. But Inland Empire, I think the problem is no one studio has the rights. I think David Lynch is like, if you can find it, you can find it. It is what it is, and you can only find it on DVD, or be a rebel. It's
so weird though, because Inland Empire is a statement about like digital media. Like, it is him. He shot it on digital. The whole thing that came along with it was like a little. I think on the DVD it came with a little commercial that he made that was like, "Don't watch movies on your phone. If you think you've seen a movie because you've watched it on your iPhone, get real. Are you fucking kidding me?" Like, it's just like the funniest thing ever. And this just has a little iPhone little noise, like, where it's like boop boop, and it's just like kind of like an iPhone, like done up like an iPhone commercial. Because he felt very strongly, like sort of like the argument about only seeing movies if they're contender bait for Oscars, if they're only in theaters. Like, he sort of had like a microcosm version of that argument, which is like, you can't watch his movies or anyone's movies on an iPhone. And it's funny that he had that argument, because while he was doing that, and it sort of seems like an old fogey kind of argument of like the golden days of being able to watch movies through this one content media form of like, it needs to be watched on a big screen. Well, I do think that's true for his films, and I do think that's true for like a lot of film in general. It's funny that he was making it for this movie, because Inland Empire is a like it's a break from the idea of traditional filmmaking in any sense, from narrative structure, from the filmmaking style, which was like he's always been very on the forefront of like trying new things and being very accepting of new kinds of media and digitizing stuff. Like he had a paywalled website that was like an alternate reality game long before he was doing these weather reports like for YouTube. He's always been sort of pushing the boundaries of like what's the next kind of vehicle for expression. And so I think Inland Empire actually it makes a nice compendium to Twin Peaks: The Return. After watching The Return, I'm like, oh, is that what Inland Empire was maybe about? Like, so I feel like it works in that sense. Like, I think
yeah. You think Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway are LA? Inland Empire is like super LA. Like
LA and the Czech Republic.
Yes, and the Czech Republic, of course. And wherever those rabbit scenes take place, which is in the darkest part of all of our hearts, I guess.
The rabbits, oh my God.
Yeah, guys, when you eventually track down Inland Empire, you're gonna
and the rabbits were part of his paid walled website that you had to like figure out all these clues, and it gave you a much longer version of the rabbits that we saw in Inland Empire. The rabbits are like a thread. Yeah.
He did this dark, static shot sitcom about a family of anthropomorphic rabbits in human clothes, and put those scenes into Inland Empire, and they're mesmerizing and terrifying.
Well, when we talk about like influence, like you've seen Bo Burnham's Inside, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
He's nominated
yes.
for Emmys. The part where he's like putting on the laugh track, like very early on, where it's like, you know, what the fuck is going on? And then he presses the button and you just hear the laughter piped in and he's just dead faced. That is a direct inspiration from Rabbits and Inland Empire, and a lot of like that is like what that's from. Like that.
Yeah, the laugh track is used to great eerie effect.
Yeah, it's just like people. It's just these rabbits saying weird things like "What time is it?" and they'll be like just canned laughter piped in. And just like 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 people will be clapping, and you're just like, "What is this?" Like it's just.
I'm making lasagna for dinner.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's just all those weird sitcom noises that people make, which really heightens the effect that people say. Which is like the thing you hear on sitcoms is the voice of dead people, because most of the sitcom laugh tracks have been recorded from like the 1950s. So, like, most people you're listening to laugh in sitcoms are dead. And, like, I feel like that's kind of like the idea he's trying to get to with that rabbit subsection. Personally.
Inland Empire has so much to mine, people. Yeah. So much. And something I wanted to mention, just because I think if you look at Lynch's work, there are a handful of people who collaborate with him. But the one I think who collaborates with him the most, who is very influential, is Angelo Badalamenti, who scored, I think, 6 of his movies. He scored more of his films than anybody else. And he particularly scored Twin Peaks, which was, a great like demonstration of everything he brought to Lynch's films. But he really brought a lot of the mood and atmosphere to a lot of David Lynch's movies that I think is kind of a through line through a lot of his work. Yeah, I just think it's worth mentioning because I own a lot of those soundtracks literally on CD and still listen to them in my car. So I love Angelo's music.
I mean, and not just Angelo, but like the collaborations that Trent Reznor. This is the first time I think Lost Highway. I think was the first time Trent Reznor ever was like did a soundtrack. Like was the person in charge of a soundtrack, and now we see where he is with the Social Network, and he's got like his hardware. But like David Lynch gave him that shot, and the soundtrack for Lost Highway is banana grams good. Like it is just David Bowie, Lou Reed. It's Rammstein. Like it's just so good. My God, is it good? Yeah.
Well, with that, I reckon we'll move on to the Rotten Tomatoes game. So,
okay.
Adam, what do you think are Lynch's top 5 Rotten Tomatoes movies based on critics' score?
In no certain order.
Yeah, let's do no certain order for the moment.
Yeah, because then it's going to take too long if I'm splitting hairs.
That's fair.
Okay. The Elephant Man, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, The Straight Story. And I guess I would say Eraserhead by default.
Yeah, I think I would say, like, if we're talking about critic scores and how well it was reviewed by critics, I would put like Eraserhead has to be way up there. Mulholland Drive is probably way up there. I'm not sure Fire Walk with Me because like it was critically panned, so I think it was Eraserhead, Elephant Man, Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, and let's give the last one to. Would it be Wild at Heart?
I feel like that one. I feel like that one probably got.
Didn't that like win Cannes or something? Didn't that like win the Palme d'Or or something?
It did, but I feel like that was an isolated incident because like. I think it should have won the Palme d'Or.
Adam was correct with his 5. So the 5.
What was it?
So the 5 are number 5, Mulholland Drive with 83%. Number 4, Eraserhead with 90%.
Yeah.
Number 3, The Elephant Man with 92. Blue Velvet with 93. Number 1, Straight Story, 95%.
Oh, Straight Story. God darn it. Oh, that made it on the list. Critics like Straight Story more than they like the Palme d'Or winning film Wild at Heart. Okay. This just shows you how dumb critics are because, like, honestly, retrospectively, Fire Walk with Me is like the best film ever, and people are like getting around to that now. But like, it's funny how like even because critics were so much enmeshed in like the world of Twin Peaks and they wanted answers, and when this film didn't give it to them, they had like a little temper tantrum about it.
Yeah, it is interesting. All right, guys, thank you so much for this. This was actually like a lot of fun, and it is exactly what I wanted it to be.
Do we want to do some final Lynch thoughts before we wrap it up? If there's anything else anyone wants to put out there that we haven't touched on.
Yeah, Adam, any final thoughts on David Lynch?
Go ahead, Adam.
I honestly just seek out his work. You know, there's no wrong way to start getting into his filmography, and I think Twin Peaks is as good an entry point as any. I think if you start binging through that show, you're going to get addicted to his work a lot faster. And I think we have a tendency to focus very much on strict filmography and prioritize that over, you know, something that's technically television. It's all one big body with David Lynch. And even though he takes a sabbatical for part of season 2 of Twin Peaks, it's very much part of what he did. And to appreciate everything in Twin Peaks The Return, which I think Videodrew and I agree is one of the most amazing things ever made in terms of cinema or television, you really need to get through those first 2 seasons. So, but you can't go wrong with any of it.
Getting you through that second season is going to be good practice for getting you through some parts of The Return too, it truly is just an exercise of, we didn't talk about it very much, but he's really into transcendental meditation. His work is made to make you sort of resist against it. I would say my final thoughts about David Lynch is that if this seems like very daunting, if the idea of watching someone's installation project seems like not your cup of tea right now, if you don't know exactly where to start with his, and you don't feel like maybe starting with the noir straightforward, but you want to get into the weird stuff, like Adam said, like his stuff is a collection and he is more than just his filmography. So seek out his shorts. They're online. Seek out his YouTube channel. Like, he's a weird guy who's sort of like artistic statement is what he is. So like he puts out stuff online all the time. Check his stuff out. You can watch in like short little intervals. Not all of it needs to be this very commitment thing, because I think that's what David Lynch is to a lot of people. It's like a commitment into an artistic expression that they're not sure they want to make. That I can see why. It's like takes time. It's like committing to The Godfather if you've never seen it, the whole thing. So check out some of his shorts. Just check out his world and see if you like the feeling of being in that world. And if so, check out his other stuff.
Yeah, I think I definitely want to slowly get in and rewatch all of these at some point where it's not just one after the other, and I have some time to sit with each of them as I go through them, because I do think there's something to appreciate about every single one of them. There's something to get out of every single one of them. I didn't really click with them until we got to Twin Peaks, and then kind of from that point, I feel like I was really into what we were seeing, even if they weren't my favorite. So I'm interested to dive back into these at a point where I can just kind of go at my own pace and kind of watch them as their own thing without making it about a whole, kind of collective series and trying to get my thoughts on that. But I definitely think people can find something out of his work even if there's just one film that speaks to them or they find interesting. But yeah, I think I am more into his films than I thought I was going to be. So I think everyone should at least give them a chance.
Yeah, that's kind of where my takeaway from all of this has been that even if you don't like one or two of them at the start, keep going. Keep trying, because I think that you will eventually, either by just pure force of will or the fact that I do think he grows as a filmmaker. I think he absolutely grows as a filmmaker moving forward, and his style and what he's trying to say does become more paramount in the later films. And I think that gives you something to connect and to hold on to. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was something I've been slightly dreading doing.
That's the David Lynch mood.
Yeah. I've been slightly dreading doing David Lynch, and
we will have to report back after we've done after we've done the series, after we've done Twin Peaks.
Oh, please do. Don't even report back. Report in real time on Twitter, and I will be there right there with you.
But I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm really glad we do it. And now I just got to find some way to watch Inland Empire so that I can complete the set.
We have a rip of it. I'll try to send that. I'll try to find a way to get that to you.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for joining us. Videodrew, where can they find you online?
Oh, I'm everywhere. I'm just everywhere. Videodrew across all social media. Me and Adam have a show called Why Are We Like This? It airs every other Saturday night. It's a live show. So check that out at 7 p.m. over on my YouTube channel. I'm also up on Anchor now. So anchor.fm/Videodrew. It's a new network collaboration with me and Nerd Chronic called Content Candy, under which banner we're putting a lot of new podcasts and shows out. So check that out. Patreon, all that fun stuff. I sell a lot of David Lynch material and products on my Depop and Etsy store too. So check those out. Not Etsy, Depop and Mercari.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation on David Lynch. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam, where can they find you online?
At Eisenthor, AIZANTHOR on Letterboxd and Twitter. It's my usual plug. And again, Videodrew already mentioned the show, but we're having a good time with that, so definitely check it out. And I'm doing this crazy bracket thing with you dorks.
Yeah.
So that keeps going. But let's keep it up. Maybe next year Dune will make it into IG. Fingers crossed.
Maybe. Oh man, next year's one's going to be interesting. Yeah. So if you aren't aware, Adam and Marisol and Mara and the soon to be Swifts, have been every week joining us for a bracket show where we go through the Comic-Con movies and pick up what is the best Comic-Con movie. So,
and there's no method to the madness.
Oh, no.
You're allowed to vote however you want. Pick your favorite or most nostalgic, or because it has the hotter cast, you just get to do whatever you want on that show. It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. So there is a podcast feed in the link down below for that.
It got me to finally watch Son of the Mask, and I hate myself.
The irony being Son of the Mask has already been knocked out.
But still, my OCD kicked in, and I watched that piece of garbage.
That is fair. Thank you, Adam, and thank you so much for being a part of the show. Bye. Guys, thank you so much for listening to our first episode of Inside the Iconography. We had a lot of fun. This was really great. I'm really glad.
It opened up a whole new avenue of film for me.
We're
going to see where it goes. We're going to see where it goes. It'll be interesting.
Next month, we have the absolutely wonderful Marisol McKee, who will be joining us, and her director of choice will be the Coen brothers. So if you're going to play along at home, the Coen brothers are who we're doing next month. Thank you so much, guys. There are all of the links are in the description down below, and of course in the podcast feed. And until next time, I'm Jacob.
And I'm Taylor.
And we will see you then.